known. In exactly 30 minutes, Maya would walk down that aisle and expose her father's darkest secrets to everyone who mattered in their social circle. But first, she needed to understand why Richard Winters had just confessed to killing her mother. Maya's hands trembled as she reached for her grandmother's pearl earrings, the same ones that had graced 3 generations of Winters women on their wedding days. Her reflection caught her eye again, and for a split second, she saw not herself, but her mother. The same high cheekbones, the same storm gray eyes that could shift from tender to tempestuous in a heartbeat, the same stubborn set to her jaw that had served the Winters women well through decades of heartbreak and triumph. "Breathe, Maya," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible above the distant sounds of the garden party set up below. 200 guests were gathering on the manicured lawns of the Belmont estate, their laughter and conversation drifting up through the windows like music from another world. She had dreamed of this day since she was 7 years old, playing dress-up in her mother's closet, dragging bed sheets behind her as makeshift trains while humming "Here Comes the Bride" off-key. The irony wasn't lost on her that 20 years later, her mother wouldn't be here to see it. Before we continue with Maya's shocking discovery, if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more dramatic tales. It really helps us bring you these compelling stories. A sharp knock interrupted her reverie, followed by the voice of her maid of honor, Jessica, calling through the door. "Maya, honey, your dad wants to see you before we head down. He seems upset about something." Maya's stomach dropped like a stone into dark water. She had been expecting this, dreading it, preparing for it for months. Her father, Richard Winters, hadn't spoken to her properly since she announced her engagement to David Chen 8 months ago. Oh, he had gone through the motions, writing the checks, approving the venue, even walking through the rehearsal dinner with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. But Maya knew that beneath his careful facade, a storm had been brewing. "Tell him I'll be right there," Maya called back, her voice steadier than she felt. She took one last look in the mirror, straightening her shoulders in the way her mother had taught her. "Winters women don't bow," Elena had always said. "We bend like willows in the wind, but we never break." The hallway outside the bridal suite stretched before her like a gauntlet, lined with family portraits that seemed to watch her every step. Here was her great-grandmother Charlotte, who had built the family's textile empire from nothing but determination and a borrowed sewing machine. There was her grandmother Rose, who had kept the business alive through the Great Depression by sheer force of will. And there, at the end of the hall, was the portrait that always made Maya's heart clench. Her mother, Elena, painted just months before the accident that had torn their family apart. Maya found her father in the library, a room that had once been her sanctuary, but now felt like a mausoleum. Richard Winters stood with his back to the door, his broad shoulders rigid beneath his perfectly tailored morning coat. At 58, he was still an imposing figure, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that commanded boardrooms and silenced opposition with a single glance. The late morning sun slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs and leather-bound books that had been her childhood companions.
"Dad?" Maya's voice seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. Richard turned slowly, and Maya was struck by how much he had aged in the past year. The lines around his eyes had deepened, carved by sleepless nights and the weight of secrets she was only beginning to understand. His face, usually animated by the passion of a man who had built an empire from nothing, seemed carved from stone. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said. And for a moment Maya glimpsed the father she remembered from childhood, the man who had taught her to ride horses, who had stayed up all night helping her with science projects, who had held her while she cried over her first broken heart. "Just like your mother on our wedding day." The mention of Elena hung between them like a ghost, and Maya felt the familiar ache of loss mixed with something newer, sharper, suspicion. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked, stepping closer. "Jessica said you seemed upset." Richard's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, a tell Maya had learned to read over the years of watching him negotiate business deals and navigate family crises. He moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens where guests were taking their seats beneath the white silk pavilion they had erected for the ceremony. "I've been thinking about your mother a lot today," he said quietly. "About what she would say if she were here, watching you marry David." Maya's breath caught. This was dangerous territory, a minefield they had been carefully avoiding for months. "She would be happy for me, Dad. She always said she wanted me to find someone who loved me for who I am, not what I represent." "Did she?" Richard's laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. "Did she really say that, Maya? Or is that what you want to believe?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed despite the layers of silk and lace. "What are you trying to say?" Richard turned from the window, and Maya was shocked by the raw pain she saw in his eyes, pain that had been carefully hidden behind years of polite society smiles and business lunch handshakes. He moved to his desk, his movements deliberate and heavy. He opened the bottom drawer, the one that had always been locked throughout Maya's childhood, the one that she had spent countless hours trying to pick when she was supposed to be doing homework. From it, he withdrew a manila folder, yellowed with age and worn at the edges.
"I'm saying that if you insist on going through with this wedding, if you insist on marrying outside our world despite everything I've tried to teach you about duty and family and the weight of the winter's name, then perhaps it's time you knew the truth about your mother." The folder hit the desk with a sound like thunder. Maya stared at it as if it were a snake coiled to strike, her mind racing through possibilities, each one more terrible than the last. "Dad, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Whatever this is, whatever you think you need to tell me, can't it wait? Today is supposed to be perfect." Richard's laugh was harsh. "Beautiful. The happiest day of your life." "That's what your mother thought too, Maya. Right up until the moment she realized that love wasn't enough to protect her from the truth." A knock at the door interrupted them, followed by David's voice calling out cheerfully. "Maya? Sweetheart, they're saying it's almost time. Everyone's seated and the string quartet is ready to start the processional." Maya's heart clenched at the sound of his voice, so full of joy and anticipation, so blissfully unaware of the bomb that was about to detonate in their carefully planned paradise. David Chen was everything her father wasn't. Gentle where Richard was forceful, patient where he was demanding, content with simple happiness where Richard always reached for more. He was a pediatric surgeon who spent his days saving children's lives, who came home exhausted but fulfilled, who had fallen in love with Maya not because of her family's money or status, but because she made him laugh, because she challenged him, because she saw past his quiet exterior to the passionate heart beneath. "I'll be right there," Maya called back, her eyes never leaving the folder on the desk. Richard's expression softened slightly at the obvious love in his daughter's voice, but his resolve didn't waver. 20 years, Maya. 20 years I've carried this secret, protected you from it, tried to find another way to make you understand why this marriage is a mistake. But you won't listen. You won't see that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. "What bridges?" Maya demanded, stepping closer to the desk. "What secret? Dad, if you know something about Mom's death that you've never told me, if there's something I need to know, then tell me. But don't you dare use it as a weapon to try to stop my wedding." The words hung in the air between them, charged with 20 years of unspoken truths and carefully maintained lies. Outside, Maya could hear the sound of the string quartet beginning their warm-up, the gentle murmur of guests finding their seats, the rustle of silk and satin as her bridesmaids took their positions. Richard reached for the folder, his fingers trembling slightly, the first sign of weakness Maya had ever seen him display. 20 years, Maya.
20 years I've carried this secret, protected you from it, tried to find another way to make you understand why this marriage is a mistake. But you won't listen. You won't see that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. What bridges? Maya demanded, stepping closer to the desk. What secret? Dad, if you know something about Mom's death that you've never told me, if there's something I need to know, then tell me. But don't you dare use it as a weapon to try to stop my wedding. The words hung in the air between them, charged with 20 years of unspoken truths and carefully maintained lies. Outside, Maya could hear the sound of the string quartet beginning their warm-up, the gentle murmur of guests finding their seats, the rustle of silk and satin as her bridesmaids took their positions. Richard reached for the folder, his fingers trembling slightly, the first sign of weakness Maya had ever seen him display. Your mother didn't die in a car accident, Maya. She died because I killed her. The world stopped. The sounds from outside faded to nothing. The golden morning light seemed to dim as if clouds had suddenly covered the sun. Maya felt as though she were drowning, gasping for air in a room that had suddenly become airless. What? The word came out as barely a whisper. Not with my hands, not with a weapon or poison or any of the dramatic things you see in movies. I killed her with the truth, Maya. With the revelation of something she could never forgive, something that destroyed her faith in everything she thought she knew about love and marriage and the man she had spent 15 years of her life with. Maya's legs gave out, and she sank into the leather chair behind her, her wedding dress pooling around her like the remnants of shattered dreams. 20 years of grief, of missing her mother's voice and guidance and unconditional love, suddenly took on a different color. A darker hue. I don't understand, she managed to say. Richard opened the folder, revealing photographs, letters, documents, a paper trail of deception that had been carefully hidden for 2 decades. Your mother found out that I had been unfaithful to her, Maya. Not once, not twice, but for years. Multiple affairs, multiple women, a whole other life that I had constructed parallel to the one I shared with you and her.
The words hit Maya like physical blows, each one chipping away at the foundation of everything she thought she knew about her family, her parents' marriage, her own understanding of love and commitment. The story is about to take an even more dramatic turn. If you want to see how Maya responds to this devastating revelation, please share this video with someone who loves compelling family dramas, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. She found these, Richard continued, lifting a stack of photographs, pictures of me with other women, hotel receipts, love letters. Maya's hands flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. The timing, the cruel cosmic irony of it was almost too much to bear. We fought. She said I was dead to her. The phrase echoed in Maya's mind, dead to her, the same words she feared hearing from her own father today. She left in the storm, crying. 2 hours later, the police called about the accident. Maya felt as though she were falling through space, untethered from anything solid and real. The mother she had mourned, the woman she had idolized, had died not in a random, senseless accident, but fleeing from the ruins of her marriage, her heart shattered by betrayal. Why? Maya whispered. Why are you telling me this now? Richard closed the folder, but the damage was done. The secret was out, poisoning the air between them like toxic gas. Because I won't watch you make the same mistake she did, he said firmly. I won't watch you give your heart completely to someone who might break it, who might betray you, who might destroy everything you think you know about love. David would never. Your mother said the same thing about me once. She trusted me completely, Maya, loved me without reservation, and I destroyed her with that trust. The sound of footsteps in the hallway broke through their confrontation, followed by Jessica's voice calling urgently, Maya, we really need to start. The guests are getting restless, and the minister is asking questions. Maya looked at her father, at this man who had just detonated a bomb in the center of her life, and felt something hard and cold crystallize in her chest. 20 years of lies, 20 years of carefully constructed mythology about their perfect marriage, their tragic loss, their bond forged in shared grief, all of it built on deception. You want to know what Mom would say if she were here? Maya stood slowly, her voice growing stronger with each word. She would say that your sins don't get to define my future. She would say that David's love is nothing like your betrayal. And she would say that keeping the secret for 20 years, using it as a weapon to control my life, is the most despicable thing you could possibly do. Richard's face went pale. Maya, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're terrified that I'm going to be happy with David, because that would mean admitting that love doesn't have to end in betrayal and death. You're so eaten alive with guilt over what you did to Mom that you can't stand the thought of me having what you destroyed. Maya Catherine, if you walk down that aisle today, you'll what? Disown me? Cut me off? Ruin my reputation? Go ahead, Dad. Do your worst, because nothing you can do to me will ever be as cruel as what you just did.
If you marry him, Richard's voice rose to a shout, you're dead to us. You're dead to this family, to everything your mother and I built, to the legacy that should have been yours. Maya froze with her hand on the doorknob, the echo of those terrible words, you're dead to us, ringing in her ears. For a moment, she was 7 years old again, desperate for her father's approval and love. But then she thought of David waiting for her at the altar, of the life they were planning to build together, of the children they hoped to have and the love they shared that was nothing like the toxic, destructive relationship her parents had apparently had. She turned back to face her father one last time, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, measured, and deadly. Then, I guess it's a good thing I have a secret of my own to share with our 200 guests. Richard's eyes widened, but before he could respond, Maya was gone, sweeping out of the library and down the hallway toward her destiny, leaving behind the shattered remains of 20 years of lies and the father who had chosen to weaponize love instead of celebrating it. The wedding march was beginning, and Maya Catherine Winters was going to walk down that aisle if it was the last thing she did. But first, she was going to make sure everyone knew exactly why her father wouldn't be giving her away. Maya's hands trembled as she gripped the ornate banister of the grand staircase, the weight of her father's revelation crushing down on her like a physical force. The sounds of the wedding celebration below seemed to come from another world, distant laughter, the gentle strains of the string quartet, the rustle of expensive fabric as guests settled into their seats. She closed her eyes and let herself fall backward through time, searching for the cracks in her childhood that she had been too young, too trusting, too desperately in love with her family to notice. She was 7 years old again, sitting on the Persian rug in her father's study, surrounded by coloring books and crayons while he worked late into the night. Even then, she had noticed the phone calls that made him step onto the balcony, the way his voice would drop to a whisper, the strange tension that would creep into his shoulders when certain names were mentioned. But she had been a child, content to bask in the warmth of his attention when he would finally close his laptop and help her color inside the lines, his large hands guiding her small ones as they brought princesses and castles to life. "Daddy, why does Mommy cry sometimes when she thinks no one is looking?" 7-year-old Maya had asked one evening, her purple crayon paused mid-stroke over a dragon's wing. Richard had gone very still, his breath catching in a way that Maya felt more than heard. "Grown-ups cry sometimes, sweetheart. It doesn't always mean something is wrong. Sometimes it just means they're feeling very deeply about something." "But Mommy's crying feels different," Maya had persisted with the brutal honesty of childhood. "It feels like the kind of crying you do when something is broken and can't be fixed." The memory hit Maya like a physical blow now, 20 years later, as she realized that her 7-year-old self had been witnessing the slow destruction of her mother's heart. Elena Winters had been crying because she was already beginning to suspect, already feeling the hairline fractures in her marriage that would eventually shatter into the deadly revelation that killed her. Maya forced herself to keep walking down the hallway, past the family portraits that now seemed like elaborate lies, past the grandfather clock that had been counting down to this moment for 2 decades. She thought about her mother's final years, how Elena had thrown herself into charity work with an almost desperate intensity, organizing fundraisers and galas as if she could somehow fix the world's broken places if she just worked hard enough, loved purely enough, gave generously enough. The Winters Foundation was Elena's creation, born from her belief that privilege came with responsibility, that those who had been blessed with wealth and opportunity owed something to those who hadn't. Maya could still remember accompanying her mother to the downtown soup kitchen every Saturday morning, watching Elena ladle out bowls of hot stew with the same graceful hands that had once been featured in Vogue for their elegant jewelry arrangements. "We're so lucky, Maya," Elena would say as they drove home through the city's wealthy districts, past manicured lawns and iron gates that separated the haves from the have-nots. "We have beautiful homes and full bellies and people who love us. That means we have to work twice as hard to make sure others have those things too."
But even in her charitable work, Maya now realized her mother had been searching for something. Redemption, perhaps, or proof that love and goodness still existed in a world that was systematically breaking her heart. The Foundation's annual Christmas party had been Elena's masterpiece, a glittering affair that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for homeless shelters and children's hospitals. Maya could still see her mother in her emerald green gown, moving through the crowd like a queen, her smile radiant and her laugh infectious, never letting anyone see the pain that was eating her alive from the inside. The irony was bitter as poison on Maya's tongue. Her father had been at every single one of those charity events, playing the role of the devoted husband, the successful businessman who supported his wife's noble causes. He had written the checks, posed for the photographs, delivered speeches about the importance of giving back to the community, and all the while, he had been living a double life, betraying the very woman who was trying to heal the world's wounds because she couldn't heal her own. Maya paused at the top of the staircase, looking down at the foyer where her bridesmaids were gathering in their powder blue gowns, their faces glowing with excitement and anticipation. Jessica caught sight of her and waved enthusiastically, mouthing, "You look absolutely stunning!" Sarah, her college roommate, was adjusting her flower crown and giggling with Maya's cousin Emma about something that had happened during the rehearsal dinner. They were all so beautiful, so happy, so blissfully unaware that Maya's world had just collapsed into rubble. How do you tell the people you love that everything they think they know about your family is a lie? How do you explain that the fairy tale they've been watching unfold, the successful businessman's daughter marrying her Prince Charming in a ceremony that would be featured in Town and Country magazine, is actually a tragedy disguised as a romance? Maya thought about David, probably pacing nervously in the groom's quarters, adjusting his bow tie for the 100th time and making terrible jokes to calm his nerves. She had fallen in love with him precisely because he was nothing like her father. Transparent, where Richard was secretive, humble, where he was ambitious, content with simple pleasures, where Richard always needed more, bigger, better, shinier. David Chen grew up in a modest apartment above his parents' restaurant in Chinatown, where every meal was a celebration, and every achievement was shared by the entire extended family. His childhood had been filled with the sounds of sizzling woks and laughing children, the smell of ginger and garlic, the warmth of a community that looked after its own. When Maya first met his family, she had been overwhelmed by their easy affection, the way they touched each other constantly, a hand on a shoulder, fingers ruffling hair, arms linked while walking as if love were something that needed to be constantly confirmed through physical connection. The Chen's restaurant Golden Dragon was a tiny place with mismatched chairs and fluorescent lighting that flickered occasionally, but the food was transcendent and the love was palpable. Maya could still remember her first dinner there, how nervous she had been to meet her David's parents, how carefully she had chosen her outfit and rehearsed conversation topics in the car. But within minutes of walking through the door, she had been enveloped in warmth so genuine it had brought tears to her eyes.
Mrs. Chen had bustled around the table, piling Maya's plate high with dumplings and noodles and vegetables she had never tried before, speaking in rapid Mandarin to her husband and then switching to English to ask Maya about her work, her family, her dreams. Mr. Chen had been quieter, but no less welcoming, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he watched his son's obvious happiness, occasionally reaching over to squeeze David's shoulder with pride that needed no words. "You make our David very happy," Mrs. Chen had said as she pressed a container of leftover soup into Maya's hands at the end of the evening. "We can see it in his face, in the way he moves. Love is like good soup. It changes everything from the inside out." Maya had driven home that night, feeling as though she had discovered a new country, a place where families actually liked each other, where love was expressed freely and frequently, where secrets weren't hoarded like treasure, but shared like sunlight. She had called her mother from the car, desperate to share her excitement, but Elena had been at another charity meeting, another attempt to fix the world's broken places, while her own heart cracked a little more. The contrast between the two families had been stark from the beginning, where the Chens gathered around their kitchen table every Sunday for loud, chaotic meals that lasted for hours. The Winters family dined in formal silence in their grand dining room, making polite conversation about business and social obligations while carefully avoiding anything too personal, too real, too potentially painful. Maya had grown up thinking that was normal, that successful families maintained a certain dignified distance from each other, that love was demonstrated through financial security and social status rather than physical affection and emotional intimacy. It wasn't until she experienced the Chen's boisterous warmth that she realized how cold and careful her own family had become. But even then, even as she fell deeper in love with David and his family's authentic joy, Maya had never suspected that her parents' careful distance was built on lies and betrayal. She had attributed it to grief, to the way trauma changes people, to the natural evolution of a long marriage that had weathered the ultimate loss. She had actually admired what she thought was their quiet strength, their ability to support each other through unimaginable pain without falling apart. What a fool she had been. The string quartet below was playing Pachel's canon now, the first notes of the processional that would officially begin her wedding ceremony. In 5 minutes, she would be expected to appear at the top of these stairs, radiant and ready to begin her new life. But how could she walk down that aisle knowing what she now knew? How could she promise to love and honor David before God and their family and friends when her own understanding of love had just been poisoned by the revelation that her parents' marriage, the template she had unconsciously used for all her ideas about commitment and partnership, had been a beautifully decorated lie? Maya pressed her palms against her temples, trying to organize her thoughts, trying to separate her father's sins from her own feelings about marriage and love and the future she wanted to build with David. Just because Richard had been unfaithful didn't mean that all men were cheaters. Just because her mother had died with a broken heart didn't mean that love was destined to end in tragedy. Just because her family's perfect facade had been hiding rot and decay didn't mean that she couldn't create something real and honest and beautiful with David. But the doubt was there now, a whisper of poison in her bloodstream. How could she be sure? How could anyone ever be completely sure that the person they loved wouldn't someday destroy them with betrayal? How could she promise forever when forever had proven to be such a fragile, breakable thing?
She thought about all the conversations she and David had had about marriage, about their dreams for the future, about the kind of family they wanted to create together. He had been so earnest, so sincere, speaking about commitment and partnership and growing old together with the kind of faith that Maya had found both touching and slightly naive. She had never questioned his sincerity because she had never had reason to question anyone's sincerity. Her father had seemed sincere too, right up until the moment he revealed himself to be a stranger. The worst part was remembering all the times her father had given her advice about relationships, all the wisdom he had shared about love and marriage and choosing the right partner. The most important thing, he had told her when she started dating seriously in college, is finding someone who shares your values, someone who comes from the same world and understands what's expected of them. Love is wonderful, Maya, but it's not enough on its own. You need compatibility, shared goals, and mutual respect. Mutual respect. The phrase tasted like ash in Maya's mouth now. What respect had Richard shown Elena when he was sneaking around behind her back for years? What compatibility had he been demonstrating when he was living a completely separate life with other women? What shared goals had they been working toward when he was systematically destroying the foundation of their marriage? And yet, Maya had taken his advice to heart. She had dated carefully, thoughtfully, always considering whether her boyfriends would fit into the Winters family legacy, whether they could handle the social obligations and business pressures that came with her name and her inheritance. She had broken up with perfectly nice men because they weren't ambitious enough, weren't sophisticated enough, weren't whatever enough to meet the standards that her father had set. Until David. David, who had won her heart not because he fit into her world, but because he had shown her a completely different world, one where love was simple and genuine and unencumbered by the weight of legacy and expectation. David, who had never once asked her about her trust fund or her family's business connections, who was more interested in her thoughts about books and movies and the small daily miracles of life than in her ability to navigate charity galas and board meetings. The irony was exquisite in its cruelty. Her father disapproved of David precisely because he was everything Richard wasn't. Honest, faithful, content with simple happiness rather than constantly reaching for more. Richard saw David's lack of ambition as a character flaw, but Maya saw it as a character strength. David didn't need to conquer the world because he had already found everything he needed in their love, in his work saving children's lives, in the small rituals of domestic happiness they had begun building together. But now, standing on the threshold of marrying him, Maya felt the crushing weight of her family's history pressing down on her like a physical force. Was she naive to believe in the kind of love David offered? Was she setting herself up for the same kind of heartbreak that killed her mother? Or was she allowing her father's sins to poison her own chance at happiness? The sound of footsteps on the marble floor below interrupted her spiral of doubt. She looked down to see David himself emerging from the groom's quarters, probably looking for her, probably worried about the delay. Even from this distance, she could see the concern on his face, the way he was scanning the crowd for some sign of what was wrong. He caught sight of her at the top of the stairs, and his entire face lit up with relief and love so pure it made her chest ache. This was the man she had chosen to spend her life with. This gentle, brilliant, devoted man who had never given her a single reason to doubt his loyalty or his love. This man who had held her through panic attacks about her mother's death, who had patiently listened to her fears about living up to the Winters family legacy, who had proposed to her not with a grand gesture designed to impress others, but with a quiet promise to love her exactly as she was for the rest of his life. David raised his hand in a small wave, his smile uncertain but hopeful, and Maya felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. Whatever poison her father had tried to inject into her veins, whatever doubt he had tried to plant in her heart, she would not let it destroy the love she had found with this good, honest man. She would not let her parents' tragedy become her own. But neither would she pretend that nothing had changed. Her father had made his choice when he decided to weaponize her mother's death, when he decided to use 20 years of lies as ammunition in his war against her happiness. He had declared her dead to the family if she went through with this marriage, had tried to use guilt and manipulation to control her life on her wedding day.
Well, if Richard Winters wanted to play with weapons, Maya would show him what a real weapon looked like. She had been his obedient daughter for 27 years, had played the perfect society princess, had made him proud with her accomplishments and her poise and her careful adherence to the family image. But he had just forfeited any claim to her loyalty or protection. Maya straightened her shoulders and began descending the staircase, each step deliberate and measured. Her bridesmaids rushed to arrange her train, their excited chatter washing over her like white noise. Jessica appeared at her elbow, bouquet in hand, her face glowing with anticipation. "Maya, you look absolutely radiant," Jessica whispered. "I can't believe this day is finally here. Are you ready to become Mrs. Chen?" Maya accepted the bouquet, white roses and peonies arranged with trailing ivy, exactly as her mother had carried 28 years ago, and looked out through the French doors at the assembled guests. 200 people, the cream of society, gathered to witness what they thought would be a fairy tale wedding. Politicians and business leaders, old family friends and new social connections, all dressed in their finest clothes and their most benevolent smiles. Her father stood at the altar beside the minister, resplendent in his mourning coat, playing his role as the proud father of the bride. From this distance, no one would guess that he had just tried to destroy his daughter's happiness with the most devastating revelation imaginable. He looked every inch the successful patriarch, the grieving widower who had raised his daughter with strength and dignity after losing the love of his life. What a performance! What a beautifully crafted lie. "Actually," Maya said quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart, "I think there's something I need to say to our guests before we begin." The French doors opened like the gates of destiny, and Maya stepped into the golden afternoon light with the deliberate grace of a queen walking to her coronation or her execution. The assembled guests turned as one, their faces brightening with anticipation and admiration as they took in the vision she presented. The cathedral train of her gown flowed behind her like liquid starlight, and the antique lace veil that had belonged to her great-grandmother caught the breeze, creating an ethereal halo around her face. But Maya's eyes were fixed on only one person, her father, standing at the altar, with his practiced smile beginning to falter as he registered something different in her expression, something dangerous and determined that made his confident posture stiffen with alarm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya called out, her voice carrying clearly across the manicured lawn without the need for amplification. The natural acoustics of the estate's garden amphitheater, designed by her great-grandfather for outdoor performances, carried her words to every corner of the assembled crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin this ceremony, there is something I need to share with all of you." A ripple of surprise moved through the guests like wind through wheat. This wasn't part of the carefully orchestrated program they had all received, wasn't part of the traditional wedding script they had come to witness. Maya could see confusion on faces she had known since childhood, family friends who had watched her grow up, business associates who had bounced her on their knees at company parties, society matrons who had helped plan this very celebration. Richard's face went ashen. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched in a gesture that might have been pleading or warning. "Maya," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, Perhaps we should what, Dad?" Maya interrupted, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Perhaps we should continue pretending? Perhaps we should keep living the beautiful lie you've constructed so carefully for the past 20 years? The guests were stirring now, sensing drama but not yet understanding its scope. Maya could see Mrs. Pemberton from the country club leaning forward in her seat, her eyes bright with curiosity. Senator Williams was frowning, probably calculating the political implications of whatever scandal was about to unfold. The society photographers, who had been discreetly positioned around the perimeter of the ceremony, were suddenly alert, their cameras ready to capture whatever was coming.
David had moved closer, his face a mask of confusion and growing concern. "Maya, sweetheart, what's wrong? What's happening?"
The endearment hit Maya like a physical blow, reminding her of everything she stood to lose, everything she was risking with this confrontation. But she had passed the point of no return. Her father had fired the first shot when he decided to weaponize her mother's death, and Maya would not go down without a fight. "What's happening," Maya said, her voice growing stronger and more resonant with each word, "is that I'm about to tell you all the truth about the Winters family. The truth about my mother's death. The truth about the man you've all respected and admired and done business with for decades." Richard's careful mask finally cracked completely. "Maya Catherine Winters, you stop this right now. You have no idea what you're doing, what damage you're about to cause." "Damage?" Maya's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "You want to talk about damage, Dad? Let's talk about the damage you did to Mom. Let's talk about the damage you did to me by lying about it for 20 years. Let's talk about the damage you just tried to do to my marriage by using Mom's death as a weapon to control my life." The whispers were starting now, a low buzz of shock and speculation that grew louder with each passing second. Maya could see her grandmother's sister, Aunt Charlotte, pressing her hand to her chest in distress. She could see David's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, looking bewildered and frightened, probably wondering if they had somehow stumbled into a family they didn't understand at all. 20 years ago, Maya continued, her voice now carrying to every corner of the garden, my mother, Elena Winters, discovered that her husband, this man standing here pretending to be a grieving widower, had been cheating on her for years. Multiple affairs, multiple women, a whole secret life that he had hidden from the woman who loved him with every fiber of her being. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps erupted from the crowd like gunshots. Someone, Maya thought it might have been Mrs. Ashford from the Historical Society, actually cried out in shock. The photographers were working frantically now, their cameras clicking like mechanical insects as they captured every moment of the unfolding drama. Richard's face had gone from ashen to purple, his jaw working soundlessly as he struggled to find words, to find some way to regain control of a situation that was spiraling wildly beyond his ability to manage. "That's enough!" he finally roared, his voice tutting through the garden like thunder. "I will not allow you to stand here and destroy everything your mother and I built together, everything we worked for, everything you destroyed," Maya shot back, her own voice rising to match his. "You destroyed it, Dad. You destroyed Mom's faith and love. You destroyed her ability to trust. You destroyed her will to live. And then you spent 20 years lying about it, pretending to be the tragic hero of a love story when you were actually the villain." The crowd was in chaos now, people rising from their seats, voices raised in shock and dismay, the careful social order of the wedding ceremony collapsing into something primal and raw. Maya could see some guests already pulling out their phones, no doubt preparing to share this spectacular meltdown with their social media networks. By tonight, the Winters family scandal would be trending on every platform, dissected and analyzed, and turned into memes by people who had never met them but would feast on their pain like vultures. But Maya was beyond caring about social media or reputation or the careful image her family had cultivated for generations. She was a woman possessed, driven by 20 years of suppressed anger and grief, and the terrible clarity that comes with having your entire worldview shattered in a single conversation. "You want to know how my mother really died?" Maya called out to the crowd, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "She didn't die in a random car accident like we've been telling everyone. She died fleeing from this house after confronting my father with evidence of his infidelity. She died with a broken heart, crying so hard she could barely see the road because the man she had loved and trusted for 15 years had spent their entire marriage lying to her face."
David was at her side now, his hand on her arm, his voice urgent and pleading. "Maya, please, let's go inside. Let's talk about this privately." "Privately?" Maya whirled to face him, and David actually stepped back at the fury he saw in her eyes. "There's been enough privacy in this family, David. Enough secrets, enough lies, enough careful silence while cancer eats away at everything good and decent and true." She turned back to the crowd, many of whom were now standing, some heading for the exits, others frozen in fascination at the spectacle unfolding before them. My father decided that if I insisted on marrying David, this wonderful, honest, faithful man who represents everything he isn't, then I was dead to the family. Dead to him, dead to the legacy, dead to everything the Winters name supposedly represents. Richard was advancing on her now, his face twisted with rage and desperation, his careful social mask completely abandoned. "You ungrateful little... How dare you air our private business like this? How dare you destroy your mother's memory? Destroy everything she worked for?" "I'm not destroying her memory," Maya screamed, her voice breaking with emotion for the first time. "I'm finally telling the truth about what you did to her. I'm finally giving her the justice she never got because she died before she could divorce you and take me as far away from your poison as possible." The confrontation had reached a fever pitch now, father and daughter facing each other across the space that should have been filled with love and celebration, their voices raised in a battle that had been building for 20 years. The wedding guests were witnessing something unprecedented in their carefully ordered social world, the complete breakdown of one of their most prominent families, the explosion of secrets that had been buried under layers of good breeding and social expectations. Mrs. Chen was crying now, her hands pressed to her face as she watched the family her son was supposed to be joining tear itself apart in the most public way possible. Mr. Chen had his arm around her shoulders, his own face etched with confusion and dismay. They had come to celebrate love and commitment, and instead they were witnessing the toxic legacy of betrayal and lies. Senator Williams was already moving toward the exit, probably calculating how quickly he could distance himself from the Winters family scandal before it damaged his own political prospects. The business associates were following suit, their faces masks of embarrassment and calculation, as they considered how this revelation would affect their financial relationships with Winters Industries. But there were others who remained rooted in place, transfixed by the raw human drama unfolding before them. Aunt Charlotte, despite her obvious distress, hadn't moved from her seat, her eyes fixed on Maya with something that looked almost like pride. Some of the younger guests, Maya's college friends, David's medical school colleagues, were watching with expressions of shock, but also support, as if they understood that Maya was fighting for something bigger than just her own vindication. "You think you're hurting me with this display?" Richard's voice was lower now, but no less venomous. "You think you're punishing me? You're destroying yourself, Maya. You're destroying your reputation, your social standing, your future. No one will ever look at you the same way again. No one will ever trust you or invite you into their homes or want to do business with you." "Good," Maya said simply, and the quiet certainty in her voice seemed to cut through the chaos more effectively than all her previous shouting. "If those are the kind of people you've surrounded our family with, people who care more about maintaining a beautiful lie than facing an ugly truth, then I don't want their respect or their friendship or their business." She turned to face David, who was still standing beside her with his hand extended, his face a map of confusion and concern and unwavering love. "David, I need you to know that everything I've told you about my family, about my mother's death, about why my father and I have been distant, it was all based on lies. I didn't know the truth until an hour ago. I'm finding out who my father really is at the same time you are."
David's expression softened immediately, the confusion clearing as understanding dawned. "Maya, whatever happened in the past, whatever your father did or didn't do, it doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change anything between us." "Doesn't it?" Richard's voice cracked like a whip across the garden. "Doesn't it change anything, Dr. Chen? You're about to marry into a family built on lies and betrayal. You're about to tie yourself to a woman who just demonstrated that she's capable of destroying anyone who crosses her, even her own father. Are you sure that's the kind of wife you want? Are you sure that's the kind of family you want to join?" The attack on David was the final straw. Maya felt something snap inside her. a dam bursting after holding back 20 years of accumulated pressure. She stepped between her father and her fiancé, her body language protective and fierce. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on David or make him question his choice to love me. You're the one who chose to live a double life. You're the one who chose to betray Mom. You're the one who chose to lie about it for 20 years. And you're the one who chose to use her death as a weapon against my happiness today." She took a step closer to Richard, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "You want to play games, Dad? You want to threaten and manipulate and try to control my life? Fine. But remember that I know where all the bodies are buried in this family. I know about the tax shelters you think no one knows about. I know about the bribes you've paid to get those government contracts. I know about the environmental violations at the textile plants that you've been covering up for years." Richard's eyes widened in shock and something approaching fear. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Maya said simply. "You declared me dead to this family. Well, dead women have nothing left to lose." The standoff between father and daughter stretched out like a taut wire charged with 20 years of accumulated resentment and betrayal and love gone toxic. The wedding guests watched in fascinated horror as the Winters family legacy imploded before their eyes, the carefully constructed facade of success and respectability crumbling to reveal the rot that had been eating away at its foundation for decades. Jessica appeared at Maya's elbow, her face pale but determined. "Maya, honey, maybe we should—" "No," Maya said without taking her eyes off her father. "No more maybe we shoulds. No more polite deflections and careful silences. This ends today, one way or another." Richard seemed to deflate slightly, the fight going out of him as he realized that his daughter was no longer the obedient little girl he could intimidate or manipulate. She had become something else entirely, a woman who had been pushed too far and was no longer willing to protect the people who had hurt her. "Your mother wouldn't want this," he said, finally, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and defeat. "Elena wouldn't want you to destroy everything we built together, wouldn't want you to turn our family into a public spectacle." "My mother is dead because of you," Maya replied, and there was no anger in her voice now, only a terrible, final sadness. "She doesn't get a vote anymore. But if she could see us now, I think she'd be proud that I finally found the courage to tell the truth about what you did to her." The weight of that statement settled over the assembled crowd like a funeral shroud. Even the most scandal-hungry guests seemed to understand that they were witnessing something profound and terrible: the death of a family, the end of a legacy, the moment when carefully maintained lies finally collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions. David stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Mr. Winters, I think maybe it's time for you to leave." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Richard looked around at the crowd, his guests, his friends, his business associates, and saw in their faces a mixture of shock, judgment, and calculation. He was no longer the respected patriarch of a prominent family. He was a man whose secrets had been exposed, whose carefully constructed reputation lay in ruins at his feet.
For a moment, Maya thought he might refuse, might try to rally the crowd to his side or launch another attack on her character. But then she saw something break in his expression, some final acknowledgement that the game was over, that 20 years of careful deception had finally come to an end. "This isn't over, Maya," he said quietly, but the threat lacked conviction. He was a man who had lost everything: his daughter, his reputation, his position in the social hierarchy that had defined his entire adult life. "Yes, it is," Maya replied, and there was finality in her voice that seemed to echo across the garden like the tolling of a bell. "It's been over since the moment you decided to use Mom's death as a weapon against my happiness. The only question now is whether you want to leave with whatever dignity you have left, or whether you want me to tell everyone about those other secrets I mentioned." Richard's face went pale, and Maya saw in his eyes the dawning realization that his daughter knew more about his business dealings than he had ever suspected.
He had underestimated her, had seen her as the obedient princess he could control and manipulate, never recognizing that she had inherited not just his intelligence, but also his capacity for strategic thinking. Without another word, Richard Winters turned and walked away from his daughter's wedding, his back straight, but his shoulders carrying the weight of a man who had lost everything that mattered. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, no one wanting to be associated with his disgrace. And Maya watched him go with a mixture of relief and profound sadness. The silence that followed his departure stretched across the garden like a held breath, pregnant with the weight of revelation and the uncertainty of what comes after a world has been shattered. Maya stood frozen in the center of the devastation she had unleashed, her wedding gown suddenly feeling like a costume from a play that had ended mid-performance. The bouquet in her hands, white roses and peonies that had been chosen to honor her mother's memory, now seemed like a memorial wreath for the death of everything she had believed about her family. David's hand in hers was an anchor in the chaos, warm and steady and unquestionably real. She squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from his presence, and slowly became aware of the individual faces in the crowd, each processing the bombshell she had detonated in their carefully ordered world. Mrs. Chen was the first to move. David's mother rose from her seat with the dignified grace that had carried her through decades of immigrant struggles and hard-won success, her silk dress rustling softly as she approached the couple standing at the altar. Her face, normally so animated and expressive, was composed but kind. And when she reached Maya, she did something that nearly broke what remained of Maya's composure. She opened her arms and enveloped her in a hug that smelled of jasmine tea and unconditional love.
My dear girl, Mrs. Chen whispered in Maya's ear, her voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry, so very sorry for what you have carried alone all these years. The gesture, so simple, so human, so completely at odds with the shocked paralysis that had gripped the rest of the crowd, seemed to break the spell that had frozen the garden in time. Other people began to move, to whisper, to approach or retreat according to their own moral compasses and social calculations. Aunt Charlotte was the next to reach Maya, her elderly frame moving with surprising speed across the lawn. Elena's older sister had always been the rebel of the family, the one who spoke her mind regardless of social consequences, and she looked at Maya with eyes that blazed with something that might have been pride. About damn time someone told the truth in this family, Charlotte said, loudly enough for half the remaining guests to hear. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to say what we all suspected, but were too polite to acknowledge. Maya stared at her great-aunt in shock. You knew? You suspected that Dad? Honey, we all suspected, Charlotte interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of decades of suppressed knowledge. Your mother wasn't stupid, and neither were the rest of us. But back then, families like ours didn't air their dirty laundry in public. We protected the reputation, maintained the facade, and let the women suffer in silence while the men did whatever they pleased. The revelation that others had known, or at least suspected, hit Maya like a physical blow. She thought of all the family gatherings where people had praised her father's devotion to Elena's memory, all the charitable events where he had been lauded as the grieving widower who channeled his loss into good works. Had they all been performances? Had everyone been playing along with a lie they all knew was false? But you never said anything, Maya said, her voice barely about a whisper. All these years, you let me believe. What were we supposed to say? Charlotte's expression softened slightly. You were a child, Maya, a grieving child who had just lost her mother. Were we supposed to destroy your father's memory, too? Were we supposed to tell you that your entire family was built on lies and betrayal? Jessica appeared at Maya's other side, her face pale but determined. As maid of honor, she had been trained to handle wedding emergencies, missing flowers, torn dresses, nervous breakdowns in the bridal suite. But nothing in the wedding planning books had prepared her for this kind of crisis. Maya, maybe we should move this somewhere more private. The photographers are— Let them photograph, Maya interrupted, her voice growing stronger. Let them document every moment of this.
I'm done hiding, done protecting people who don't deserve protection, done maintaining a beautiful lie for the sake of appearances." As if summoned by her words, one of the society photographers approached hesitantly, his camera lowered respectfully. Maya recognized him, Marcus Sullivan, who had been documenting high society events for decades, whose pictures graced the pages of Town and Country and Vanity Fair. "Ms. Winters," Marcus said quietly, "I want you to know that I won't publish anything without your permission. This is your story to tell, not mine to exploit." The unexpected kindness in his voice nearly undid Maya's carefully maintained composure. In a world where scandal was currency and private pain was public entertainment, his offer of discretion felt like a lifeline. "Thank you," she managed to say. "But I think maybe it's time for the truth to see the light. Maybe other families are living with the same kinds of secrets, the same kinds of lies. Maybe someone needs to break the silence." David stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "Maya, are you sure? Once this is public, there's no taking it back. Your father, your family's business, your reputation."
"What reputation?" Maya laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "The reputation built on my mother's corpse? The reputation that requires me to pretend my father is a hero instead of the man who destroyed the only parent I had left?" She turned to face the remaining guests, many of whom were now standing in small clusters, their voices low as they processed what they had witnessed. Some had already left. Maya could see cars pulling away from the estate's circular drive, their occupants no doubt rushing to spread the news to anyone who hadn't been present for the live performance. But others remained, and Maya was surprised by who had stayed. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, who ran the children's hospital where David worked, stood near the back with her husband, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. Senator Williams had left, but his wife remained, her face set in lines of quiet determination that suggested she had her own thoughts about powerful men and the women they betrayed. Maya's college friends had clustered together near the Rose Garden, their faces showing a mixture of shock and fierce protectiveness. They had lived through late-night conversations about Maya's complicated relationship with her father, had witnessed her struggles to live up to impossible expectations, and had celebrated when she finally found someone who loved her for herself rather than her pedigree. "I know this isn't the wedding you came to see," Maya called out to the assembled crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the garden. "I know this isn't the fairy tale you expected to witness, but maybe fairy tales are part of the problem. Maybe we need to stop pretending that perfect families exist, that successful men are automatically good men, that women should suffer in silence to protect everyone else's comfort." Mrs. Chen squeezed Maya's hand, and when Maya looked at her, David's mother nodded encouragingly. "You speak the truth. Truth is sometimes painful, but it is always necessary." Dr. Hendricks stepped forward from the back of the crowd, her medical training having given her experience with crisis situations and difficult conversations. "Maya, what you've shared today takes tremendous courage. Speaking truth to power, even when that power is within your own family, is one of the hardest things anyone can do. Especially when that family has the resources to destroy you for it," added a voice from the crowd. Maya turned to see Sarah Morrison, a journalist who had covered several charity events for the local paper. She was watching Maya with the keen interest of someone who recognized a story of broader significance. "Is that a threat or a warning?" Maya asked. Sarah smiled grimly. "A warning and an offer. If you decide you want to tell this story properly, on your own terms, with context and nuance and respect for your mother's memory, I'd be honored to help you do that." The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Maya could feel the weight of decision pressing down on her, the choice between retreating into private silence or stepping fully into the light of public scrutiny. Her father had already declared her dead to the family. Did she have anything left to lose? "Maya," David said softly, "whatever you decide, I'm with you. But you don't have to decide right now. You don't have to figure everything out today."
She looked at him, this man who had just watched her destroy her family's reputation and was still standing beside her, still offering his love and support without reservation, and felt a surge of emotions so powerful it nearly brought her to her knees. How can you still want to marry me? How can you still want to tie yourself to this mess, to a family built on lies and betrayal and— Maya, David's voice was firm, cutting through her spiral of self-doubt. You are not your father's sins. You are not your family's secrets. You are the woman who had the courage to tell the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. You are the woman who chose love over legacy, honesty over reputation. You are exactly who I want to spend my life with.
The declaration sent ripples through the remaining crowd. Maya could see tears in Mrs. Chen's eyes, could see Aunt Charlotte nodding approvingly, could see her college friends exchanging glances of amazement and support. But she could also see the calculating expressions on some faces, the way certain business associates were already mentally distancing themselves from the Winters family scandal. The social and economic consequences of her revelation were only beginning to unfold, and Maya was starting to understand the true cost of her moment of truth. The business, she said suddenly, the realization hitting her like ice water. Dad will destroy the business rather than let me inherit it. He'll sell it or dissolve it. Let him, Aunt Charlotte said fiercely. The business was built on your great-grandmother's vision and your grandmother's sacrifice. If Richard wants to destroy their legacy out of spite, that's his choice to live with. But you don't have to sacrifice your integrity to preserve something that's already been corrupted by his lies. Maya felt a strange sense of liberation at those words. The textile company that had been her expected inheritance, the social position that had defined her identity, the family legacy that had shaped her entire life, all of it was gone now, burned away by the fire of truth she had lit. There's something else, she said, her voice growing stronger as she made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Something else you all should know about the man you've been doing business with, trusting with your investments, celebrating as a pillar of the community. David squeezed her hand in warning. Maya, are you sure? Once you cross this line— I'm sure, she said, and she was. Her father had chosen to declare war when he tried to use her mother's death as a weapon to control her life. If he wanted to destroy her, she would take him down with her. She turned to address the crowd, many of whom were leaning forward with the anticipation of prey animals scenting blood. My father's infidelity wasn't his only secret. Winters Industries has been engaged in systematic tax evasion for years, hiding profits in offshore accounts while claiming losses to avoid paying their fair share. They've been bribing government officials to secure contracts that should have gone to legitimate bidders, and they've been covering up environmental violations at their textile plants that have been poisoning groundwater in 3 different states. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by urgent whispers and the sound of phones being pulled from purses and pockets. Maya could see Senator Williams's wife making notes on her phone, probably to pass along to his ethics committee. Dr. Hendricks was shaking her head in disgust, no doubt thinking about the children's hospital that had accepted donations from a company built on corruption. Sarah Morrison was definitely taking notes now, her journalist instincts fully engaged. Maya, can you substantiate these claims? Do you have documentation? I have copies of everything, Maya said calmly. Financial records, email communications, environmental reports that were supposed to be destroyed. I've been preparing for this day longer than I realized. The admission sent another shockwave through the crowd. Maya realized that some part of her had been gathering ammunition against her father for years, collecting evidence of his corruption even when she didn't consciously understand why. Perhaps some instinct had warned her that this confrontation was inevitable, that eventually the lies would become too heavy to carry. Why now? Asked Dr. Hendricks. Why reveal all of this today, at your own wedding?
Maya considered the question, looking around at the faces of people she had known all her life, people who had shaped her understanding of power and privilege and responsibility. "Because he gave me an ultimatum," she said finally. "He told me that if I married David, I would be dead to the family. He tried to use my mother's death, his own guilt over causing her death, as a weapon to control my life. And I realized that I could either spend the rest of my life enabling his lies and corruption, or I could finally tell the truth and live with the consequences."
"And the consequences will be severe," said a new voice from the edge of the crowd. Maya turned to see Robert Ashford, one of her father's oldest business partners, his face grim with understanding. "Richard won't just destroy you financially, Maya. He'll use every connection, every favor owed, every piece of leverage he has to make sure you never work in this city again." "I know," Maya said simply, "but David and I don't need his money or his connections. We don't need to be part of a world that values reputation over integrity, that protects powerful men at the expense of the women they destroy." David stepped forward, his voice clear and determined. "Maya and I will build our own life, our own legacy, one based on honesty and service and love, instead of lies and manipulation and control." The declaration was like a line drawn in the sand, forcing everyone present to choose sides. Maya could see the division happening in real time, some people nodding in support, others backing away as they calculated the cost of association with her rebellion. Mrs. Chen moved to stand beside the couple, her small frame radiating fierce protectiveness. "In my country," she said, her accented English carrying clearly across the garden, "we have the saying, 'The bamboo that bends in the storm survives, but the tree that will not bend breaks.' Maya has learned to bend without breaking. She has survived the storm of lies and chosen to grow toward the light of truth." Aunt Charlotte joined them, followed by Jessica and Maya's college friends, creating a small but determined circle of support around the couple. It wasn't the wedding party Maya had planned, but it was something more valuable. A chosen family of people who valued truth over comfort, integrity over reputation. "So what happens now?" Maya asked, looking around at the faces of her supporters. "What do we do when the dust settles and the photographers go home and the real consequences begin?" Sarah Morrison stepped forward, her notebook still in hand but her expression respectful. "Now you decide how you want to tell your story, because, make no mistake, this story will be told, either by you or about you. You can control the narrative, provide context and nuance, honor your mother's memory properly. Or you can let others define what happened here today." Maya looked at David, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of fear and determination that she felt in her own heart. They were about to step off a cliff together, leaving behind everything safe and familiar for something unknown but honest. "Then let's tell it right," Maya said finally. "Let's make sure that when people hear this story, they understand that it's not about destroying a family, it's about refusing to let lies destroy any more families. It's about choosing love over legacy, truth over reputation, hope over fear." The sun was beginning to set over the garden, casting long shadows across the scene of devastation and revelation. Maya's wedding gown caught the golden light, transforming her into something mythical, a warrior goddess rising from the ashes of her old life to claim her true power. The fairy tale was over, but the real story, messy and painful, and ultimately hopeful, was just beginning. 3 months after the wedding that never was, Maya Chen, she had taken David's name immediately after their quiet courthouse ceremony, stood in the cramped but warm kitchen of Golden Dragon Restaurant, her sleeves rolled up and her hands covered in flour as she helped Mrs. Chen prepare dumplings for the evening rush. The irony was not lost on her that she had traded the grand estate kitchens of her childhood, with their marble countertops and professional-grade appliances, for this tiny space with its mismatched equipment and perpetual steam, and had never been happier. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of consequences, revelations, and unexpected redemptions. The story of the Winters family scandal had indeed spread like wildfire through social media and traditional news outlets, but Maya's decision to work with Sarah Morrison had allowed her to control the narrative in ways she hadn't expected. The in-depth article in the Sunday magazine was titled "Breaking the Silence: A Daughter's Choice Between Truth and Legacy,"
and it had sparked a national conversation about family secrets, inherited trauma, and the courage required to break cycles of deception.
The response had been overwhelming. Maya's inbox had flooded with messages from women who had their own stories of family betrayal, of secrets kept to protect reputations, of choosing between truth and comfort. Some had shared stories of fathers who had cheated and mothers who had suffered in silence. Others had written about corporate corruption they had witnessed but been afraid to report. A few had even reached out with their own evidence of wrongdoing at companies connected to Winters Industries, adding to the federal investigation that was now underway. Richard had indeed followed through on his threats, using every connection and favor owed to try to destroy Maya's reputation and prospects. But his efforts had largely backfired. The public revelation of his infidelity and business corruption had cost him far more credibility than Maya's truth-telling had cost her. Several major clients had pulled their contracts from Winters Industries. The Environmental Protection Agency had launched an investigation into groundwater contamination. The IRS was conducting a comprehensive audit of the company's finances. Most devastatingly for Richard, the board of directors had voted to remove him as CEO, citing serious concerns about leadership and corporate governance. Aunt Charlotte, who had quietly held more shares in the company than anyone realized, had been instrumental in organizing the coup. The woman who had been dismissed as the family eccentric for decades had revealed herself to be a shrewd businesswoman who had been waiting for the right moment to act. "Your great-grandmother would be proud," Charlotte had told Maya during one of their weekly coffee meetings. She built this company to provide for her family and community, not to line the pockets of corrupt politicians and poison their earth. What Richard turned it into was an abomination of her vision. Under new leadership, Winters Industries was undergoing a complete transformation. The company had hired an environmental consulting firm to clean up the contaminated sites and implement sustainable practices. They had voluntarily disclosed their tax irregularities to the authorities and were working to pay back taxes and penalties. Most importantly, they had established a fund to compensate communities that had been harmed by their environmental violations. Maya had been offered a position on the board of directors, but she had declined. The textile business felt like a relic of her old life, and she was discovering that she had no desire to return to that world of corporate politics and social obligations. Instead, she was channeling her business education and inherited sense of social responsibility into something entirely new. The Elena Winters Foundation had been Maya's idea, born from late-night conversations with David about how to honor her mother's memory in a way that would have made Elena proud. Rather than the traditional charity galas and society fundraisers that had defined her mother's work, Maya was creating something more grassroots and direct. The foundation focused on supporting women who were trying to escape abusive or deceptive relationships, providing legal aid, counseling services, and financial assistance to help them rebuild their lives. "Mama Elena would love this," Mrs. Chen had said when Maya first explained the concept, using the name she had adopted for her daughter-in-law's mother. "She would love that her memory is helping other women find their strength." The foundation was still small, operating out of a shared office space downtown, and funded largely by Maya's personal savings and donations from supporters who had been moved by her story. But it was growing steadily, and Maya was discovering that she had a talent for the unglamorous but essential work of nonprofit management. She spent her days writing grant applications, meeting with potential donors, and talking to women who needed help finding the courage to speak their own truths. One of those women was sitting across from Maya now in the foundation's modest conference room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea as she struggled to find the words to describe her situation. Amanda was 34, a mother of two, married to a man who presented himself as a pillar of the community while systematically destroying her self-esteem and isolating her from her support network. "I keep thinking I'm crazy," Amanda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He never hits me, never screams. He just undermines everything I do, makes me doubt my own perceptions, tells me I'm too sensitive when I try to confront him about his behavior." Maya nodded, recognizing the pattern. "That's called gaslighting, and it's a form of abuse. You're not crazy, and you're not too sensitive. What you're experiencing is real and valid and harmful."
"But everyone thinks he's such a good man," Amanda continued. "He volunteers at the church, coaches Little League, and donates to charity. Who's going to believe me if I try to leave him? Who's going to take my side against someone with such a perfect reputation?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow, echoing her own fears from 3 months ago. Amanda, I want you to listen to me carefully. Abusive people are often very good at maintaining public facades. They're often charming and successful and well regarded by people who don't see what happens behind closed doors. That doesn't make your experience any less real or your need to protect yourself any less valid. She reached across the table and took Amanda's hands in hers. It takes tremendous courage to even ask for help, to even acknowledge that something is wrong. You've already taken the hardest step by coming here today. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. I read about you online, about what you did at your wedding. I couldn't believe someone actually had the guts to tell the truth like that. Consequences be damned. It made me think that maybe I could find that kind of courage too. The conversation continued for another hour, with Maya providing Amanda with resources and referrals, and most importantly, validation that her instincts were correct and her safety mattered. As Amanda left the office with a folder full of information and a safety plan, Maya felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment that came with this work. David found her there an hour later, still sitting in the conference room and staring out the window at the city street below. He had finished his shift at the hospital and stopped by to pick her up for dinner, a ritual they had established during these early months of their marriage. Rough day? He asked, settling into the chair across from her. Enlightening day, Maya corrected. I talked to 3 different women today who are trapped in situations that look perfect from the outside, but are destroying them from within. It makes me think about how many people are living behind facades, how many families are built on lies and silence and the complicity of everyone around them. David reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in the gesture that had become their shorthand for comfort and connection. Do you ever regret it, speaking out the way you did, burning it all down? Maya considered the question seriously. The past 3 months hadn't been easy. She had lost most of her old social circle, had been disinherited completely, had seen her name dragged through tabloid headlines and social media speculation. There had been nights when she lay awake wondering if she had made a terrible mistake, if she had thrown away everything secure and familiar for the sake of a principle that might not have been worth the cost. But then she thought about Amanda and the dozen other women she had helped through the foundation. She thought about the environmental cleanup that was happening because she had spoken out. She thought about the conversations that were happening in families and communities because her story had given people permission to examine their own situations more honestly. No, she said finally, I don't regret it. I regret that it took me 27 years to find the courage to speak the truth. I regret that Mom died without ever getting justice for what he did to her, but I don't regret choosing honesty over comfort. David smiled, the expression that had first captured her heart 2 years ago and still made her pulse quicken. Good, because I have some news that I think you're going to want to hear. Maya raised an eyebrow. Good news or bad news? That depends on your perspective. David pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. Your father was arrested this morning. Federal charges for tax evasion, bribery, and environmental crimes. The investigation you triggered has apparently uncovered evidence of a corruption network that goes far beyond just Winter's Industries. Maya stared at the headline, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. A sense of justice was finally being served for decades of wrongdoing. But there was also sadness, grief for the father she had once loved and respected, sorrow for the family that might have been if he had chosen differently. How do you feel about it? David asked gently. Like an orphan, Maya said honestly. Mom is gone, and now Dad is, well, he's not dead, but he's dead to me. For the first time in my life, I have no family legacy to live up to or live down. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time. You're not an orphan, David said firmly. You have me, and my parents, and Aunt Charlotte, and all the people who have chosen to stand with you. Family isn't just about blood and DNA and inherited legacies. It's about the people who love you and support you and help you become the best version of yourself. As if summoned by his words, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway of the conference room carrying a container of soup and wearing the expression of maternal concern that had become so familiar and precious to Maya over the past few months. Maya, dear, you look tired, Mrs. Chen said, bustling into the room and setting the soup on the table. You need to eat, need to take care of yourself. Helping others is important, but you cannot pour from an empty cup. The advice was so simple, so practical, so full of love that Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. This was what family was supposed to feel like, not the careful politeness and hidden agendas she had grown up with, but this genuine care and unconditional support. Thank you, Mama Chen, Maya said, using the name that had felt strange at first, but now came as naturally as breathing. For the soup? For everything. I don't know what I would have done without you and Papa Chen these past few months. Mrs. Chen beamed at the address, then settled into a chair beside Maya with the air of someone preparing for a serious conversation. I want to tell you something, Maya. Something about your mother that maybe you don't know. Maya's attention sharpened. Since the wedding revelation, she had been hungry for any new information about Elena, any details that might help her understand the woman her mother had really been beneath the perfect society wife facade. I met your mother once, a long time ago, maybe 15 years. She came to the restaurant late one night after we were supposed to be closed. She was crying, very upset, and she asked if she could just sit for a while. Maya's breath caught. 15 years ago would have been right around the time her mother discovered Richard's affairs, right around the time her world was falling apart. I made her tea, sat with her, Mrs. Chen said softly. She told me she felt like she was drowning, like everything she thought she knew about her life was a lie. She said she had a daughter she was trying to protect, but she didn't know how to protect her from the truth about her father. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Her mother had known. Elena had known about Richard's betrayals and had been struggling with how to handle them, how to protect Maya while dealing with her own pain. She talked about you for hours, Mrs. Chen continued, how proud she was of you, how worried she was about what kind of example she was setting by staying silent about your father's behavior. She said she wanted to leave him, but was afraid of what it would do to you, afraid of destroying your faith in love and family. Maya was crying now, tears flowing freely as she finally understood the impossible position her mother had been in. Elena hadn't been weak or naive. She had been trapped by her love for her daughter and her desire to protect Maya's innocence for as long as possible. What did you tell her? Maya managed to ask. Mrs. Chen smiled sadly. I told her that children are stronger than we think they are, that they can handle truth better than they can handle lies. I told her that someday, when you were old enough to understand, you would want to know who your mother really was, not the perfect facade she showed the world, but the real woman, with real struggles and real courage.
The words hung in the air like a benediction, like a message from beyond the grave. Maya could almost feel her mother's presence in the room, could almost hear Elena's voice whispering approval and encouragement. She would be so proud of you, Mrs. Chen said, reaching over to squeeze Maya's hand. Proud that you found the courage she couldn't find. Proud that you chose truth over comfort. Proud that you're using your pain to help other women who are facing the same impossible choices she faced. Maya wiped her eyes, feeling something settle into place in her chest, a sense of completion, of finally understanding the legacy her mother had really left her. Not the polite society princess role she had tried to play, not the perfect family facades she had tried to maintain, but the courage to speak truth even when it was painful, even when it cost everything. Thank you, Maya said simply, for telling me that, for helping me understand. David had been listening quietly, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. Your mom sounds like she was an amazing woman who was trapped in an impossible situation, just like a lot of the women you're helping now. Maya nodded, feeling the pieces of her new identity clicking into place. She wasn't Maya Winters anymore, the society princess burdened by family expectations and hidden secrets. She was Maya Chen, the woman who had chosen love over legacy, truth over reputation, hope over fear. She was the daughter of Elena Winters, not the perfect society wife, but the real woman who had struggled with impossible choices and had ultimately died for want of the courage that Maya had finally found. The Elena Winters Foundation would continue to grow,
would help more women find their voices and their strength. Maya would continue to build a life based on honesty and service and love, the kind of life her mother had dreamed of but had never been able to claim for herself. As they left the office together, Maya, David, and Mrs. Chen, Maya felt the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders. The legacy she had inherited wasn't money or property or social status. It was something far more valuable, the understanding that love without truth is just another kind of prison, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is break the chains that bind not just yourself, but everyone who comes after you. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded Maya of her wedding day, the day that had ended one story and begun another. She had lost a father and gained a family. She had destroyed a legacy and created a new one. She had chosen love over lies, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. 5 years later, Maya Chen stood in the nursery of their modest two-bedroom apartment, watching her 18-month-old daughter Elena sleep peacefully in her crib. The room was small compared to the grand nursery that had been prepared for Maya's arrival 28 years ago, but it was filled with something the Winters estate had always lacked: genuine warmth and unconditional love. Little Elena, named for the grandmother she would never meet, but whose legacy lived on in her mother's work, had David's gentle eyes and Maya's stubborn chin. She was already showing signs of the fierce independence that ran in the maternal line of women who refused to be silenced, who chose truth over comfort even when it cost them everything. Maya wiped her eyes, marveling at the miracle of the small person who represented hope and new beginnings and the chance to break cycles that had persisted for generations. Elena would grow up knowing the truth about her family's history, both the painful parts and the triumphant ones. She would understand that love sometimes requires difficult choices, that integrity matters more than reputation, and that speaking truth to power is not just a right but a responsibility. The Elena Winters Foundation had grown beyond Maya's wildest dreams in the 5 years since that explosive wedding day. What had started as a small operation in a shared office space had evolved into a nationally recognized organization with offices in 12 cities and a staff of 47 dedicated advocates, counselors, and legal professionals. The foundation had helped over 3,000 women escape abusive situations, had provided legal aid that resulted in dozens of successful prosecutions, and had become a model for other organizations working to break the silence around domestic abuse and family secrets. Maya's story had become a case study in business schools and psychology programs, examined as an example of how one person's decision to speak truth could create ripple effects that changed entire systems. The revelation of Richard's corruption had led to a federal task force that had uncovered a network of environmental crimes and tax evasion schemes involving dozens of companies. 3 senators had been forced to resign. A Supreme Court justice had been impeached for accepting bribes disguised as charitable donations. The reverberations were still being felt in corporate boardrooms and political offices across the country.
But perhaps the most meaningful impact had been the personal stories, the letters that still arrived daily from women who had found the courage to leave destructive relationships, from children who had confronted abusive parents, from whistleblowers who had reported corporate wrongdoing, because Maya's example had shown them that survival was possible after speaking truth to power. The apartment door opened quietly, and Maya heard David's familiar footsteps in the hallway. He had just finished a late shift at the hospital, where he now served as chief of pediatric surgery. His promotion had come not through family connections or political maneuvering, but through his skill, dedication, and the respect of his colleagues, a concept that still felt revolutionary to Maya after growing up in a world where advancement was often about who you knew rather than what you could do. "How's our little revolutionary?" David whispered as he joined Maya beside the crib, his arms sliding around her waist in the gesture that still made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. "Sleeping like the angel she definitely isn't," Maya replied with a smile.
Earlier that day, Elena had demonstrated her emerging personality by refusing to eat anything that wasn't thrown on the floor first, by climbing onto the kitchen counter while Maya's back was turned for 30 seconds, and by charming every stranger they encountered at the grocery store with her infectious giggle and fearless friendliness. She gets that from you, David said, pressing a kiss to Maya's temple. The refusing to accept things as they are, the determination to explore every boundary, the ability to win people over even when she's being completely unreasonable. Maya leaned into his warmth, still amazed after all these years by how natural this felt, this partnership built on honesty and mutual respect and shared values. They had married quietly at City Hall 6 months after the wedding disaster, with only Mrs. Chen, Aunt Charlotte, and Jessica in attendance. It had been everything their original wedding hadn't been. Simple, honest, focused on their love for each other rather than on performing for an audience. How was the board meeting today? David asked, referring to Maya's monthly commitment to the Winters Industries Board of Directors. After 3 years of refusing all involvement with the family business, Maya had finally accepted a position when Aunt Charlotte had made it clear that the company needed young leadership committed to ethical practices and environmental responsibility. Under the new management structure, Winters Industries had become a B corporation, legally committed to balancing profit with social and environmental impact. They had pioneered new sustainable textile manufacturing processes, had become carbon neutral, and had established a worker ownership program that gave employees a stake in the company's success. It was everything Maya's great-grandmother had envisioned when she started the company with nothing but determination and a borrowed sewing machine. Productive, Maya said. We finalized the partnership with the Women's Cooperative in Guatemala. They'll be producing our new organic cotton line, and we're guaranteeing fair wages and safe working conditions. It feels good to use the company's resources for something that actually helps people instead of just enriching shareholders.
The transformation of Winters Industries had been one of the unexpected redemptions to emerge from the ashes of the family scandal. What Richard had built as a machine for personal enrichment had been reimagined as a force for positive change in the textile industry. Maya took no credit for the transformation. That belonged to the dedicated employees and ethical board members who had done the hard work of rebuilding. But she was proud to be part of an organization that now reflected her values rather than contradicting them. "And your father?" David asked gently. It was a question he still posed occasionally, not because he thought Maya should reconcile with Richard, but because he understood that the wound of that relationship was complex and might never fully heal. "Still in prison," Maya said simply. "Aunt Charlotte says he's been writing letters asking to see me, but I'm not ready for that. Maybe someday, when Elena is older and I can explain to her why her grandfather made the choices he made, but not yet." Richard had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for his various crimes. The trial had been a media circus, with Maya's wedding day revelation playing a central role in the prosecution's case. She had testified about the evidence she had gathered, about the pattern of deception and manipulation that had defined her father's life, about the ultimate cost of prioritizing reputation over integrity. It had been one of the hardest things she had ever done, sitting in that courtroom, looking at the man who had once been her hero, watching him be led away in handcuffs to begin serving a sentence that would keep him imprisoned until he was nearly 70. But it had also been necessary, a final step in breaking the cycle of secrets and lies that had defined the Winters family for too long. Maya still received letters from Richard occasionally, rambling missives that alternated between self-pity and rage, attempts at manipulation disguised as paternal concern, and rare moments of what might have been genuine remorse. She read them all, but rarely responded, understanding that her father was still trying to control their relationship, even from behind bars. "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" David asked, a question that had come up periodically over the years as Maya processed the complex grief of losing a parent who is still alive. "I think I already have, in a way,"
Maya said thoughtfully. Not because he deserves it, but because carrying that anger was poisoning my ability to be fully present for the life we're building. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what he did. It just means accepting that he made choices that hurt people, including himself, and that those choices don't get to define my story anymore. The wisdom had been hard-won, emerging from years of therapy and reflection and the patient support of people who loved her unconditionally. Maya had learned to separate her father's actions from her own worth, to understand that his betrayals said nothing about her capacity for trust and love and healthy relationships. Little Elena stirred in her crib, making the soft sounds that indicated she was beginning to wake up from her nap. Maya reached down to stroke her daughter's hair, marveling at how the small person had already changed her understanding of love and protection and the lengths a parent would go to keep their child safe.
I keep thinking about my mother, Maya said quietly, about the impossible position she was in, trying to protect me from the truth about Dad while dealing with her own pain. I understand now why she stayed as long as she did, why she didn't just leave him the moment she found out about the affairs. Elena's situation had become clearer to Maya as she experienced motherhood herself. The desire to preserve a child's innocence, to maintain stability even when the foundation was cracking, to sacrifice your own happiness for what you believed was your child's well-being. These were instincts Maya recognized in herself, even though she hoped she would have the courage to make different choices if faced with similar circumstances. "She would be so proud of you," David said, echoing words that Mrs. Chen had spoken countless times over the years. "Proud of the woman you've become, proud of the life you've built, proud of the way you've used your pain to help other people." Maya nodded, feeling the truth of that statement settle into her bones. Elena's legacy lived on not in the society pages or charity galas that had defined her public life, but in the foundation that bore her name, in the women who found courage through Maya's example, in the little girl sleeping peacefully in her crib who would grow up knowing that love without truth was no love at all. The sound of the apartment door opening again announced the arrival of Mrs. Chen, who had a key and used it liberally to check on her son and daughter-in-law and granddaughter. At 72, she moved with the energy of someone half her age, driven by the inexhaustible force of maternal love that had expanded to encompass Maya and Elena as completely as if they had been born into the Chen family. "Maya, dear, I brought soup," Mrs. Chen called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the warmth that had become the soundtrack of Maya's new life. "And Papa Chen made dumplings. We thought you might be tired after the board meeting." The simple kindness of the gesture, the assumption that Maya might need comfort food and family time after a long day, still sometimes brought tears to Maya's eyes. This was what family was supposed to feel like, not the careful politeness and hidden agendas of her childhood, but this genuine care and unconditional support. "Mama Chen has impeccable timing," David said with a grin. "I was just about to suggest we order takeout." They moved to the kitchen, where Mrs. Chen was already ladling soup into bowls and arranging dumplings on plates with the efficient grace of someone who had been feeding people for decades. Papa Chen emerged from the living room where he had been watching the news, his face lighting up at the sight of his family gathered around the small kitchen table. "How is little Elena?" he asked, settling into his chair with the careful movements of someone whose arthritis was beginning to slow him down, but whose spirit remained undaunted. "Growing too fast," Maya said, accepting a bowl of soup that smelled like comfort and love. She said "mama" clearly for the first time yesterday, and this morning she figured out how to open the cabinet doors. "I have a feeling we're in for an interesting toddlerhood." "Good," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Smart girls should be curious, should question everything, should refuse to accept things just because that's how they've always been done. The world needs more women who aren't afraid to make noise." The comment was vintage Mrs. Chen. Practical wisdom wrapped in fierce love and delivered with the authority of someone who had survived poverty, immigration, and decades of building a business from nothing. Maya had learned more about strength and resilience from David's parents than she had from all the finishing school classes and etiquette lessons of her privileged childhood.
As they ate, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Morrison, the journalist who had helped Maya tell her story 5 years ago and had become a close friend in the process. The message was simple but exciting. Turn on Channel 7 News at 11 p.m. You're gonna want to see this. Intrigued, Maya showed the message to David, who raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Sarah had moved on to investigative work for a national network, and her stories often featured powerful people being held accountable for their actions. Maya had a feeling that whatever Sarah wanted her to see would both be significant and satisfying.
They finished dinner and moved to the living room, where Elena was now awake and charming her grandparents with her latest tricks, clapping her hands, pointing at objects, and babbling as if she were naming them, and attempting to climb onto Papa Chen's lap with the determination of a mountain climber. At 11 o'clock, they gathered around the television to watch Sarah's report. The story was about a corruption investigation that had grown out of the original Winters Industries scandal, focusing on a network of corporate executives and politicians who had been using environmental consulting firms as fronts for money laundering and bribery schemes. The investigation began 5 years ago, Sarah's voice narrated over footage of Richard being led away in handcuffs. When Maya Winters Chen made the decision to expose her father's crimes during what was supposed to be her wedding day, that act of courage set in motion a series of investigations that have now led to the indictment of 47 individuals, including 3 current senators and the CEOs of 12 major corporations. Maya watched in amazement as the scope of the corruption network was revealed. Her decision to speak out had been like pulling a single thread that had unraveled an entire tapestry of corporate crime and political corruption. The environmental cleanup efforts alone had resulted in the restoration of dozens of contaminated sites and the implementation of new regulations that would protect communities for generations to come. Mrs. Chen, who now serves on the board of the reformed Winters Industries and runs the Elena Winters Foundation, declined to be interviewed for the story. But in a written statement, she said, "Speaking truth to power is never easy, but it's always necessary. The women we serve through the foundation understand that silence protects abusers and corruption thrives in darkness. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is turn on the lights." Elena chose that moment to take her first independent steps, wobbling across the living room from Papa Chen's arms to Maya's outstretched hands. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. This little girl, named for a woman who had died for lack of courage to speak her truth, taking her first steps toward independence, as her mother's legacy continued to create ripples of change across the country. Maya caught Elena in her arms, spinning her around as the little girl giggled with delight. "Look at you, my brave girl," Maya whispered, "walking right into your future with no fear at all." "She gets that from her mother," David said, his voice thick with emotion as he watched his wife and daughter. The courage to take risks, to step into unknown territory, to trust that love will catch her when she falls. Mrs. Chen was crying openly now, her hands pressed to her heart as she watched Elena toddle back toward Papa Chen with increasing confidence. "She will never know a world where women are supposed to stay silent," she said through her tears. "She will grow up knowing that her voice matters, that her truth has power, that love without honesty is not really love at all." As the evening wound down and the Chen grandparents prepared to leave, Maya found herself standing at the window overlooking the city lights, Elena sleeping in her arms and David's warmth at her back. 5 years ago, she had stood at another window in her father's mansion, looking out at a life that seemed predetermined and unchangeable. She had been the obedient daughter, the perfect society princess, the woman who had never questioned the foundations upon which her world was built. That woman felt like a stranger now. Maya Chen was someone entirely different, a mother, an advocate, a woman who had chosen love over legacy and truth over reputation. She had lost a father and gained a family.
She had destroyed one inheritance and created another. She had spoken truth to power and discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be silent. Do you ever miss it? The old life, the certainty, the security of knowing exactly what was expected of you? Maya considered the question seriously, looking out at the city where thousands of people were living their own complicated stories, making their own difficult choices between comfort and truth, between staying silent and speaking out.
I miss this simplicity sometimes, she said honestly. I miss believing that the people I loved were exactly who they appeared to be. But I don't miss the fear, the constant worry that someone would discover our secrets, the exhaustion of maintaining a beautiful lie. And I definitely don't miss the loneliness of being loved for who people thought I was, instead of who I actually am. Elena stirred in her arms, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. Maya wondered what dreams filled her daughter's mind. Probably simple things like bottles and toys and the faces of people who loved her unconditionally. But someday, Elena would dream bigger dreams, would face her own choice between truth and comfort, would have to decide what kind of woman she wanted to become. I want her to know that love is supposed to feel safe, Maya said, pressing a kiss to Elena's forehead. Not the kind of safety that comes from avoiding difficult conversations or hiding painful truths, but the kind that comes from knowing that the people who love you will still love you when they see all your flaws and failures and fears. David tightened his arms around them both, and Maya felt the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged, with exactly the people she was meant to love. The apartment was small, their bank account was modest compared to what Maya could have inherited, and their life was complicated by the ongoing demands of the foundation and the lingering consequences of her father's crimes. But they had something that all the Winters family money had never been able to buy: the freedom that comes from living authentically, the peace that comes from having nothing to hide, and the deep satisfaction that comes from using your pain to help other people heal. 5 years ago, Maya had been dead to her father because she chose love over legacy. But in losing his version of family, she had found something infinitely more valuable: a chosen family built on truth and mutual respect and unconditional love. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her place in a world that desperately needed more people willing to speak truth to power. As they prepared for bed, Maya thought about the letter she would write to Elena when her daughter was old enough to understand it. The letter that would explain why her grandfather wasn't part of their lives, why her grandmother had died so young, why her mother had chosen to destroy everything safe and familiar in order to build something real and honest and true. "Dear Elena," the letter would begin, "by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to understand that sometimes the people we love make choices that hurt us deeply. Your grandfather was not a bad man, but he was a weak one, and his weakness caused pain that rippled through generations. Your grandmother was a good woman, trapped in an impossible situation, and her story is part of your story too. I want you to know that you come from a long line of strong women who refused to be silenced, even when silence would have been easier. You have your great-grandmother Charlotte's fierce independence, your grandmother Elena's compassion and grace, and hopefully your mother's willingness to choose truth over comfort when the choice becomes necessary. The world will try to tell you that keeping peace is more important than speaking truth, that maintaining relationships is more valuable than maintaining integrity, that other people's comfort is more important than your own safety and authenticity. Don't believe those lies, my darling girl. Your voice matters. Your truth has power. And love that requires you to hide who you are is not really love at all. You were named for a woman who died because she couldn't find the courage to speak her truth. You were raised by a woman who almost made the same mistake.
You have the chance to break that cycle completely, to live a life built on honesty and authentic love, and the understanding that you are worthy of relationships that celebrate who you are, rather than trying to change you into someone else. Be brave, Elena. Be honest. Be yourself. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to stay silent when silence protects people who don't deserve protection. With all my love and faith in your strength, your mother. Maya smiled as she imagined Elena reading that letter someday, hopefully in a world that had learned from the courage of women like them, in a time when speaking truth to power was seen not as betrayal, but as love in its highest form. The little girl slept peacefully in her crib, unaware that she was the inheritor of a legacy more valuable than money or property or social status. She was the inheritor of truth, of courage, of the understanding that love without honesty is just another kind of prison. And Maya Chen, formerly Maya Winters, fell asleep that night with the deep satisfaction of someone who had burned down a beautiful lie and built something real and honest and true from the ashes. The fairy tale was over, but the real story, messy and complicated and ultimately triumphant, was just beginning.